a real pleasure to welcome in a preeminent historian of University of Alabama athletics, Mr. Kirk McNair of Bama Magazine and BamaMag.com. Kirk, was that intro sufficient enough, or do I need to work on that?
Just like I wrote it.
Check's coming, right? I mean, I can count on it. I got you. Well, Kirk, as we get started here, what season is this for you in terms of Alabama football? Between being a publisher, between working at the university, you also have been a sports writer, worked for in the newspaper business in the past. Do you have a count on it at this point, Kirk? Or
yeah, it's funny that somebody asked me just less than an hour ago how long I'd been covering Alabama, and I said just since 1968.
So as long as I've been around, I was born in 68. So my math tells me that's probably 47 years or so, 48 years, something like that. Yeah. You're closing in on the golden anniversary, Kirk. Amazing.
Well, yeah, it'll be a miracle if I make it, but I'm getting close. That's right.
Well, one of the great things about Kirk is that in a situation like what we encountered over the weekend when the University of Alabama saw the passing of one of its all-time legends, you can bring in Kirk McNair and get some real perspective on what Harry Gilmer meant, not only to Alabama football, but to the university in general. And Kirk, when you hear the name Harry Gilmer, what comes to mind immediately for you?
Yeah, well, really, for me, because I knew him in his later years, knew him best as gentleman. I mean, he was just such a gentleman and looked the part. When he was scouting was when I first met him. He had finished already his Alabama career, which of course I'd heard about all my life growing up in Birmingham, and then had coached in the pros for a long time and then scouted for a long time. And I knew him as a scout. And you'd walk in the press box and you'd see that Stetson and that older fella even then, but you knew that he had been an athlete. You could just pick right up on that. He still had the way he carried himself. And but the main thing is he was just such a kind person and a person you really enjoyed talking to, and one of those people who has that knack of making it seem to you like what you have to say to him is important, or at least he's interested. And just a delightful guy, and then just sort of an amazing person too, in that maybe I'd run over to Bryant Museum a couple of times that this happened when I went over there, and they said Harry Gilmer's here, and I said, well, what's he doing? And I said, well, he just decided to come on down to Tuscaloosa, and he lived right outside of St. Louis. He'd just go jump in his car and make that drive, and he'd be in his 80s making that trip and visiting, and I know the guys over at the museum are really going to miss him because he just delighted them with his stories, and even though he was a superstar, he was so modest about his accomplishments as a player. He was much, much more interested in the people he had met, the lifelong friends he had met at Alabama, and the success of the teams that was when he played there. So, I don't know of anybody. I've never heard one discouraging word about Harry Gilmer. Nothing but the very, very best.
And Kirk, I guess since he played, almost 70 years ago it's been since he played at the University of Alabama, it gets lost that, as you said, this guy was a superstar before a lot of superstars at Alabama. I guess Don Hudson before him, maybe you could put sort of in that class.
Howell and Hudson.
Yeah.
And then you had to go back, to Fred Singleton in the 20s and Joe Sewell in the teens.
Yeah.
Those kinds of guys. And when I was old enough to realize how important Harry Gilmer had been to it, and people, including my father and his friends, and it was a time when Stabler and Namath and Stabler were the back-to-back superstars of that era that I started really learning about Harry Gilmer and what he had meant, and that's who they compared him to. They said that he was just absolutely the fan favorite, nationally known at a time when it was a lot more difficult to be nationally known. You had, guys like Red Smith and Grantland Rice who covered
right.
people with a national audience. And, so he was later it was a Johnny Musso, and then, maybe a Jay Barker, or,
right.
whoever. But it was at a much, much higher plane than not just good players, not just All-Americans or that type. He was absolutely at that very highest level.
Did it at a number of positions, too. I mean...
Yeah, a two-way player, of course.
Right.
And,
no choice in that back then. Yeah.
That's right. And he, he's still in the Alabama record books in a couple of areas, so including interceptions on defense and of course, his pinpoint passing in an era when 50% was a big deal, and he went 8 for 8 in the Sugar Bowl, with
a ball that looked like a basketball.
Many, but,
yeah.
And and he could punt, and he was the punt return man and the kickoff return man, and just a terrific athlete. Really played defense most of his career in the pros, but he was just a terrific player.
And the jump pass, right? I mean, that was the signature.
That was the signature, and he told funny stories about that. In our, we really had kind of a long interview when I was doing a book called "What It Means to Be Crimson Tide," which was really the memories of select players, and he talked about the jump pass and explained why he did it that way, which was a little bit technical, but basically. It was a way where he was a halfback. He was the left halfback in the Notre Dame box, which was the equivalent of the quarterback in a way. It's sort of maybe like a wildcat quarterback would be. If you think about the offense that Auburn runs, if they had a Harry Gilmer, you'd be worried because he would start out running, and he also had receivers out, and if it was a pass opportunity. He said that in order to get centered up rather than stop, he had the ability, just sort of natural, the way he described it, where he would jump in the air and be able to turn his hips and shoulders downfield where he wasn't throwing across his body or against his body. And so we'd square up to make that pass. But he said that Coach Thomas hated it. Coach Frank Thomas was his coach, and he said his successor, Ed Salem, came in. And Ed started trying to emulate that, and Thomas would jump him and tell him, "You're going to have to learn to throw the pass correctly." So it was there was a lot going on in that jump pass that, as you say, it was his signature, and really not very many people could do it. I saw one in a practice at Alabama a few years ago, and I kind of laughed because I knew. Of course, about Harry Gilmer, I think I was probably the only reporter that was watching that day that knew what knew what had amused me.
Right.
And but again, I just can't say enough about him. Now, he lived a good long life. I'm sorry, the last couple of years were so bad for him. But he was a prince of a guy.
Well, Kirk, we really appreciate you joining us here on the program to talk about the legendary Harry Gilmer and provide some excellent perspective on what he meant to Alabama football and the University of Alabama in general. Thanks so much, Kirk.
My pleasure, Travis. See you soon.